The Apache girl pulled him from the river, and he promised to defend her people. The river didn't just pull, it seized, slammed, and dragged him with a violence that felt personal, the icy current swallowing his shouts as it hurled his body between jagged stones like it wanted to grind him down to nothing. One moment he'd been riding along the bank, reins tight in his hand, scanning the tree line for the outlaws who'd cut him off from the trail. And the next his horse slipped on wet shale, pitching him headfirst into the roaring water with a bone-deep crack that stole the air from his lungs. He tried to swim, tried to grab hold of anything, but the river spun him like driftwood, smashing his shoulder against a submerged boulder so hard he saw sparks beneath the water before everything went dark and filled with cold. When he surfaced again, half conscious, the world blurred into white sun and violent noise, dizziness spinning the sky as the current dragged him toward a narrow choke point where the river carved itself between two cliffs. He reached out blindly, fingers scraping uselessly against slick rock, chest burning, lungs begging for air he couldn't hold on to. His hat tore away, his coat filled with water, his boots felt like anchors pulling him toward the bottom. And then, just as the river pitch-shifted into a deadly drop, someone seized his collar from behind. It wasn't a man's grip. Too small, too fast, too fierce. A voice cut through the roar, a sharp command in Apache he couldn't understand but felt in his bones. He thrashed instinctively, but the hold on him tightened, and a second hand grabbed his arm with surprising strength. The tug dragging him sideways toward a cluster of low-hanging willow branches. He gasped as his head broke the surface. A young woman braced her bare feet against the rocks, her dark braid plastered to her back, her arms straining as she hauled him inch by inch out of the water while the river fought to reclaim him. She wasn't tall, she wasn't large, but she was stronger than fear, stronger than panic, stronger than the storm of the river itself. "Hold!" she shouted, not in English, in a voice honed by command. He grabbed a branch, fingers slipping, but her grip never faltered, not once, until finally he slid onto the sandbar, coughing, shaking, spitting out river water while she collapsed beside him, panting hard. He rolled onto his back, chest heaving, staring at the sky as it spun above him. She sat upright first, pressing her hands to her knees, eyes scanning him with a mix of suspicion and reluctant relief. Young, maybe 18 or 19, Apache by dress and braid, fierce by posture. Her shadow fell across him, blocking the sun, and the first thing she said, voice low, steady, was not a question. It was a warning. "If I had come 1 moment later," she said, breath still sharp, "the river would have taken you." He swallowed hard, dizzy, freezing, alive only because she refused to let him sink. And as she turned her head sharply toward the trees, as if expecting danger to follow him, he understood something even through the fog of exhaustion. She hadn't just pulled him from the river. She'd stepped between him and something far worse. She didn't give him time to collapse again, didn't give him space to argue, didn't even give him the comfort of confusion. The moment she confirmed he was breathing, she grabbed his wrist with surprising force and pulled him farther up the bank, away from the sucking mud and the swirling edge of the river, moving with the urgency of someone who knew danger came in more shapes than water. His boots dragged through wet sand as he tried to stand, but his legs buckled beneath him, pain lancing through his shoulder and ribs as the world tilted sideways. She hissed something under her breath. Sharp, impatient, not at him, but at the river that had almost stolen him. Then she crouched beside him, pressed her hand firmly to his chest to keep him still, and leaned close enough for him to see the droplets clinging to her dark lashes. "You cannot walk," she said, her English rough but clear. "Your head struck stone." He tried to answer, but his throat burned from swallowed river water, and all that came out was a broken rasp. She frowned at the sound, then touched the back of his skull gently with her fingertips, her brow creasing as she found the swelling rising beneath his wet hair. "You are lucky," she murmured. "Another inch, and you would not wake." Lucky. The word didn't feel true, not when he could still hear the distant echoes of hoofbeats in his mind, the outlaws whose gunfire had scattered his horse, the sharp whistle of a bullet slicing the air. He shuddered involuntarily, and her eyes narrowed. "Someone chased you." It wasn't a question. He didn't answer, but she understood anyway. She looked toward the trees, scanning the shadows with a tense, alert stillness that told him she had been raised in land where silence was a warning, not peace. Then, without another word, she stood and reached down, hooking her arm beneath his good shoulder. He stiffened when she tried to lift him, more in surprise than pain, but she ignored it, anchoring her feet in the sand and pulling with her whole body until he was upright. "You will not die on this riverbank," she said firmly. "Stand." Her strength was startling, unexpected for someone her size, but not reckless. She adjusted her grip, bracing his weight against her own, guiding him toward the tree line where tall cottonwoods broke the sun into thin, dancing slivers across the forest floor. His vision blurred again as they walked, each step sending spikes of pain through his skull. But she slowed each time he stumbled. Her breath steady even as his ragged gasps broke the quiet. When they reached the shadowed safety of the woods, she finally eased him onto a fallen log and crouched in front of him, her expression unreadable but resolute. "I do not know who hunts you," she said, eyes sharp, "but they will not find you before my people do." He blinked at her, the girl who had pulled him from death's grip, now claiming him as her responsibility, and felt a strange mixture of gratitude and dread settle in his chest. Because one thing was clear. She hadn't just saved him. She had decided to keep him alive. And that meant whoever had chased him into the river wasn't the only threat he needed to worry about. He drifted in and out of consciousness as she half-guided, half-dragged him through the trees, the world tilting in dizzy waves until the rhythmic crackle of a fire reached his ears, and the shadows around him shifted from forest shapes to the silhouettes of people. Men and women standing at the edge of a small clearing, their posture rigid, their eyes narrowed, their hands resting on spears and bows as the Apache girl brought the stranger into their camp. He tried to sit up straighter, to look less like a dying man and more like someone who still had a spine. But the moment he lifted his head, the pain exploded behind his eyes, dropping him to one knee with a groan he couldn't swallow. Sharp voices circled him instantly, not in English but in quick, clipped Apache, words striking like arrows in heated debate. One older warrior stepped forward, face creased with age and suspicion, his gaze cold as flint as it swept over the girl first, not the stranger. "Why is he here?" he demanded, tone heavy with reprimand. She didn't flinch. "He was drowning," she said simply. "So the river should decide," he snapped back. A murmur rippled through the onlookers, agreement, unease, warning. The girl moved between them and the injured man without hesitation, chin lifting in quiet defiance. "The river did not take him," she said. "I would not watch it try again." Another warrior stepped closer, younger, stronger, posture bristling with mistrust. "He is not one of us," he said, eyes flicking over the stranger's soaked clothes and pale skin. "He does not belong here." "He was chased," she answered. "And those who chase him may still be near." That paused them, just for a moment, but long enough for him to see the shift. Their suspicion sharpened into wariness, a silent calculation about whether danger was closing in around their own home. He swallowed hard, trying to sit upright, trying to speak despite the burning in his throat. "I didn't mean—" The older warrior cut him off with a curt gesture. "Do not speak unless asked." The girl's jaw tensed. "He is injured." "He is trouble," the man replied, "and trouble brings blood." She turned slightly, and the stranger saw it then, a flicker of something raw and protective in her expression, not for him alone, but for what bringing him into camp meant. She was risking herself, standing alone against her own people. A woman crossed the circle then, kneeling beside him with a healer's practiced calm. She touched his forehead, checked the swelling, pressed soft fingers to his pulse. "He lives," she murmured, "but he needs rest, not arguments." The old warrior stepped close enough that the stranger could see scars carved across his knuckles. "Then let him rest outside our lands," he growled. "Dead or alive, he is not our concern." The girl straightened fully now, shoulders squared, voice low but unshaken. "He is my concern," she said, "and I will not leave him to die." A thick silence followed, the kind that decides fates. He realized with a strange twist in his chest that she had not just saved his life. She had claimed responsibility for it. And in doing so, she had stepped into conflict with her own tribe. The fire snapped sharply as dusk thickened over the clearing, and the Apache camp settled into a tense half-circle around the wounded stranger, watching every shallow rise and fall of his chest like they were waiting for him to either wake cleanly or die quickly. But the girl who had dragged him from the river knelt beside him with a steadiness that defied all the wary stares, her hand hovering near his shoulder each time his breath hitched, her presence more shield than caretaker. Across the flames, one warrior paced like a caged wolf, a tall man with sinew-carved arms, a double-braided hair cord, and a look that could have cut through bark. He was younger than the elder but older than the girl, and when his gaze locked on the stranger, it burned with a harsh mixture of distrust, resentment, and something deeper, fear that she had brought danger into their home. "This is foolish," he muttered loudly, stabbing a stick into the fire. Sparks jumped like startled birds. "You risk our people because you pity a drowning fool?" She didn't rise to his bitterness, only answered quietly, "He would have died." "Then let him." His voice snapped like a dry branch. The girl finally looked up, her dark eyes meeting his with an unflinching steadiness that only fueled his agitation. "Has our tribe ever turned away the dying?" she asked. "He is not us," the warrior growled. "He is a stranger, a pale one. Men like him take land, take food, take peace. You know this." She pressed her lips into a thin line. "He is one man, dying." "And dying men still bring enemies," he shot back, his glare shifting to the woods. "How do we know who chased him? How do we know they are not already near?" That question dropped the camp into uneasy quiet, even the children falling still, as if the threat had slipped between the trees and crouched beside them. The girl answered anyway. "If danger is near, it is not because I pulled him from the river. It is because danger was already here." The warrior's nostrils flared, jaw tightening. "You speak as if you know the hearts of white men." "I know the hearts of people," she said softly, "and sometimes the river gives us back someone we are meant to save." His expression twisted, not with fury but with something wounded, an emotion he would never name. "You always see good where none exists," he said quietly. "One day, it will cost us." The elder stepped forward then, raising a hand to silence both of them. "Enough," he murmured. "We are not at war tonight." His eyes cut sharply towards the stranger, But hear this, girl. If he brings danger, you will answer for it." She bowed her head in respect, but did not back down. "I will answer," she promised. The warrior watched her, jaw clenched, brows furrowed, before turning away, stalking into the shadows with a stiffness that said more than words ever could. And the stranger, still drifting on the edge of consciousness, sensed the truth behind the tension. Someone in this camp cared deeply what happened to her, and that someone wanted him gone, not because of who he was, but because of who she might become if he stayed. Night settled over the Apache camp, in layers of orange firelight and deep blue shadows. But the tension didn't ease with the darkness. If anything, it grew sharper, coiling through the air as warriors stood guard at the tree line, their silhouettes rigid against the flickering flames while the girl knelt beside the wounded man, occasionally glancing toward the forest like she expected danger to step out at any moment. The hum of distant insects and the soft crackle of burning wood couldn't hide the way the elders murmured among themselves, voices low, urgent, shaped by worry. The stranger felt the prickle of unease even through the haze of pain radiating from his ribs and skull. He pushed himself onto one elbow, wincing, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar voices until the girl pressed a firm hand to his shoulder and eased him back down. "Rest," she whispered. "You cannot fight your own breath." He swallowed, throat raw, and rasped, Why does everyone look like something's coming?" Her jaw tightened in a way that told him she had been waiting for that question. She sat back on her heels, hands clasped in her lap, eyes fixed not on him, but on the dark stretch of forest beyond the camp. "Because something is," she said, "for weeks now." She told him in clipped, quiet words that their hunting trails had been disturbed, their horses frightened by strangers' scent, their scouts finding boot prints where only moccasins should be. At first, they thought it was outlaws, then soldiers. But the signs multiplied. Campfire ash still warm when their hunters approached, carved markings on trees from hands that did not belong to their tribe. "My people have lived in these lands longer than memory," she said. "We know every sound, every shadow. But lately the shadows come from men who do not belong to this place." He closed his eyes briefly, a sick understanding forming. "The men chasing me," he murmured. "The ones who ran my horse off the bank. They weren't locals." Her gaze snapped to him. "How many?" "At least 8, he said. "But they weren't traveling alone. They were scouts. Someone else is coming." A sharp rustling swept through the camp as 2 warriors burst through the trees, breath misting in the cold night air, urgency carved into every line of their bodies. The elder approached them immediately. "What do you see?" he demanded. One of the scouts swallowed hard. "Riders," he said. "North Ridge. Too many for hunting parties. Too quiet for bandits." The elder's face darkened. "How many?" The scout hesitated. "More than we can count with the moon hidden." The girl's breath hitched, but she kept her face still. The warrior who hated the stranger stepped out of the shadows, bow in hand, jaw tight. "This is what I warned," he growled. "He brought danger." "No!" the girl snapped, rising to her feet, fists clenched at her sides. "Danger was already here. He is only the first piece we saw." The camp erupted in debate, fear edging voices, warriors grabbing weapons, women gathering children, the elder trying to restore order. And in the middle of the chaos, the stranger pushed himself upright, trembling but resolute. "If those men find your camp," he said hoarsely, "they won't just be looking for me. They'll take whatever they want." Silence cut through the noise like a blade. Warriors turned toward him, toward the girl, toward the dark forest where something unseen and enormous moved in the night. And for the first time, the Apache understood. The threat they feared was not approaching. It was already here. The fire crackled low as the camp pulsed with fear and restless movement. Warriors sharpening blades, mothers gathering children close, the elder murmuring commands that tried and failed to stitch calm back into the night. But the girl who had pulled him from the river stood apart from the chaos, her silhouette outlined by firelight as she stared into the trees, with a tension that ran deeper than fear, deeper than instinct. Something almost like dread shaped by memory. The stranger watched her, leaning against the log she'd guided him to earlier, his breath still ragged, his vision still wavering, yet unable to shake the question tightening his chest. "Why?" he rasped finally, breaking the thick silence between them. "Why risk all this? For me?" She didn't turn at first, didn't flinch, didn't pretend she hadn't heard him. Instead, she exhaled slowly, a breath so full of weight it told him the answer wasn't simple. When she finally faced him, her eyes carried a depth that hadn't been there by the river. "Because once," she said, voice low but steady, "someone pulled me from something worse." He blinked, the meaning slipping through him like cold water. She crouched beside him, not too close, but close enough that the fire caught the faint scar across her forearm, the kind carried from rope burns or restraints. "I was 12, she continued, gaze steady, "taken by men who traded girls like cattle. They kept us in a canyon camp. They said no warrior could find us. But one did. He broke their gate in the night. He carried me out. He fought until he bled. And when he brought me home," her voice cracked, not in weakness, but in the raw ache of remembering something sacred. "He said I had to live in a way that honored what he risked." He swallowed, throat tight. "Your father?" She shook her head. "My brother." She looked toward the warriors gathered near the elder, men sharpening spears, adjusting bowstrings, her expression softening with something like grief. "He died protecting our people 2 winters ago, a raid along the trading trail." She paused, breath trembling just once before she steadied it. "I could not save him, but I can save others. So when I saw you in the water, I didn't think, I remembered him." The stranger felt his chest pull, something hot and painful stirring beneath the bruises. He looked down at his hands, ashamed of the instinct that had driven him to fight her grip at the riverbank. "You shouldn't have had to do that," he murmured. "Not alone." "I was not alone," she said softly. "The river was loud. My heart was louder." Her gaze shifted back to the forest. "And now my people need someone else to make a choice." "What choice?" Her eyes locked on his, fierce and unwavering. "To run, or to stand with us." A shout tore through the camp before he could answer. One of the scouts from earlier bursting through the brush, face pale beneath war paint. "They're close," he gasped. "Riders, many, moving fast." Warriors seized their weapons. Fear became urgency. Danger became reality. The girl rose in one fluid motion, gripping her bow. Then she looked back at the stranger, her voice firm. "If you stand with us tonight," she said, "you will not stand alone." He pushed himself to his feet, swaying but determined, because now he finally understood. She didn't save him because he deserved it. She saved him because someone once saved her, and she wasn't finished honoring that promise. Not yet. The forest no longer breathed in night sounds. It held its breath. The chirping insects gone silent. The wind slipping around the trees like it didn't want to touch what was coming. And every Apache warrior in the clearing stiffened at the same instant as the distant sound of hooves bled into the darkness, not a wild gallop but a disciplined thrum that matched the rhythm of men who traveled together with purpose and confidence. The stranger pushed himself upright despite the pain screaming through his ribs, and the girl stepped beside him without hesitation. bow in hand, fingers already brushing the feathers of her arrows. Warriors took positions along the tree line, crouched low behind brush and rock, their silhouettes blending into shadow, while the elder moved through them like a quiet ghost, giving orders too soft for outsiders to hear. The pacing warrior, the one who had wanted the stranger tossed back to the river, tightened his jaw and whispered sharply, "This is your doing," as he passed, but his anger was overshadowed by the fear hiding beneath it. The stranger didn't answer. He couldn't. Because deep in his gut, he knew what kind of men were riding into Apache land. He remembered their laughter as they chased him, the way they fired near his horse's hooves to make it panic, the way one shouted, "Drive him into the river! Let the water finish him!" They weren't soldiers. They weren't lawmen. They were something worse. Men who believed no border, no tribe, no woman, no land was beyond their taking. The first shape appeared between the trees, a shadow on horseback, tall, alert, gliding through the forest with the ease of someone who didn't expect resistance. Then a second rider, a third, then many more, the faint glint of rifles slung across saddles catching the firelight for only a heartbeat before the forest swallowed it again. The elder raised one hand, a signal, and the Apache froze like the land itself obeyed him. The rider in front leaned forward, scanning the trees with a lazy confidence that made the stranger's stomach twist. "Stay low," the girl whispered, nudging him gently. Her voice was steady, but her pulse flickered visibly at her throat. The riders slowed, their horses shifting uneasily, sensing what their masters didn't, that eyes watched from every shadow. "You sure he drowned?" one rider muttered. "Don't see how a man survives a fall like that." Another snorted. "If he lived, we'll find him. And if these savages saw him—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The threat hung in the air like thick smoke. The stranger clenched his jaw. He knew what they'd do if they found the Apache camp. The girl's hand brushed his forearm, a small, grounding touch. "When they see us," she murmured, "they will choose violence." "Then what do we do?" he whispered back, her eyes hardened. "We choose it first, if they force us." A twig cracked beneath a horse's hoof. The lead rider lifted his rifle, and before he could aim, the elder stepped out of the shadows, tall and proud, his presence cutting through the darkness like the sudden rise of a storm. The riders jerked back in surprise, hands flying to weapons. The elder's voice carried through the night, low, strong, unafraid. "Turn back," he said. "This is Apache land." The lead rider smirked. "Not tonight, old man." And in that suspended breath between warning and war, the stranger felt the shift. The moment battle became inevitable. The lead rider's smirk didn't fade when the elder warned him. It sharpened, curdling into the kind of arrogance born from a long trail of men who believed the world belonged to them. He nudged his horse forward, rifle angled lazily in one hand, the metal catching a thin slice of moonlight as he said, "We're looking for someone. Pale skin. Took a bad fall. If you've got him, hand him over and we'll leave you breathing." The elder didn't blink, didn't flinch, didn't so much as tilt his chin. "No one belongs to you." That reply hit the riders like a slap. Several leaned forward in their saddles, hands drifting toward gun belts. The girl's fingers tightened on her bowstring, her breath steady even as her shoulder shook with contained fear. The pacing warrior, the one who had despised the stranger from the beginning, slipped closer through the brush, bow raised, arrow nocked, eyes burning with a mixture of fury and protectiveness. The stranger felt himself pulled forward by something he couldn't name, a tug in his chest that began by the river when she seized him, grew when she defended him in front of her tribe, and now roared like fire in his ribs. He stepped out of the shadows. into open view, into danger, into the space where one wrong move meant he would be the first man to die. The Apache warriors hissed warnings, hands reaching to pull him back, but he shook them off, breath ragged but stance firm. The girl's eyes widened, fear flickering through them, not fear for herself, but for him. The lead rider's smirk grew into a grin. "Well, well," he drawled. "The river didn't finish you. Shame." Rifle barrels lifted. The stranger lifted nothing. No weapon, no threat, just his voice. "You don't want this fight," he said, trying to keep his words steady even as his ribs screamed. "There are families here, children. You walk any farther and you won't leave these woods alive." Laughter erupted from the riders, cruel, sharp, echoing through the trees. "You think these people frighten us?" the lead rider said. "We burn camps like this without blinking." He shifted his rifle, aiming, not at the stranger, at the girl. The instant that barrel lined up with her, something explosive surged through the stranger, faster than thought, faster than pain, faster than fear. He lunged forward, slamming into the rider's arm just as the rifle cracked. The shot tore through the night, carving a hot streak past the girl's shoulder and splintering bark from a tree behind her. Warriors shouted, horses reared. The forest erupted into chaos. The girl ducked instinctively, then rose in a swift, fluid motion and released her arrow with deadly accuracy, the shaft slamming into the lead rider's hand and knocking his rifle into the dirt. "Enough!" the elder roared. But it was too late. The riders surged forward, weapons raised, fury exploding like sparks into dry grass. And in the center of the chaos, the stranger planted his feet in the snow, lungs burning, vision swimming, and lifted the fallen rider's rifle, not to fire, but to block the path of the men charging toward the girl. "You'll go through me first," he shouted. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The riders saw a wounded man choosing death to protect a girl who owed him nothing. The Apache saw a pale stranger stepping into their fight, as if it was his own. And the girl saw something she hadn't expected, someone standing where her brother once stood. Between her and death, the riders hesitated only for a breath. One stunned heartbeat in which the forest held still, as if the earth itself watched the stranger brace himself between their charge and the girl. But that moment was all the Apache warriors needed. They erupted from the shadows like arrows loosed from a single bow, a coordinated surge of bodies and steel that slammed into the intruders with the force of a dam breaking. Warriors tackling horses sideways, knocking rifles from hands, sweeping legs out from charging riders while the elder commanded the fight with sharp, clipped orders that cut through the chaos like thunder. The girl fired arrow after arrow, each shot precise, each one meant to wound, not kill, because she fought like someone defending her land, not avenging it, the feathers at her fingertips blurring with speed as she covered the stranger's flank. The pacing warrior, the one who had hated the stranger, stormed into the fray with a war cry that rattled the tree branches, bringing down a rider twice his size with a blow that sent the man sprawling into the dirt. The stranger staggered beneath a rider who lunged at him, blocking the blow with the stolen rifle, pain shredding through his ribs until he fell to one knee, vision crackling at the edges. The rider yanked a knife from his belt and raised it high, only for the girl to slam into him from the side, knocking him off balance and sending both tumbling into the snow. She scrambled up first, breath ragged, hair loose from its braid, and planted her boot on the man's wrist until his fingers splayed open in surrender. "Stay down," she hissed, voice shaking with fury. The stranger pulled himself upright, leaning heavily on the cedar trunk behind him, chest heaving as he watched the battle around them slowly shift. Riders faltering, warriors tightening their hold, the intruders realizing too late that they had stepped into land protected by people who did not break easily. One by one, The surviving riders dropped their weapons or turned their horses, fleeing into the trees with curses that faded into the night. Silence fell like a heavy blanket, thick, cold, trembling. Warriors gathered, some injured, none dead. The girl stood over the stranger, breath fogging in the cold air, her bow slipping from her grip as the last traces of adrenaline left her limbs. She knelt in front of him, closer than before, closer than she'd ever dared, and pressed her trembling hand to his cheek, searching his eyes for something she didn't have words for. "You could have run," she whispered, voice barely a thread. "You should have." He swallowed hard, leaning into her touch without meaning to. "You pulled me from the river," he murmured. "I wasn't about to let someone drag you into something worse." Her breath caught, sharp, soft, wounded. She looked away for a moment, gathering courage, then whispered, "My brother said a life saved is a life carried. You carried mine tonight." He shook his head. "You saved me first." She hesitated, then placed her palm over his heart, light, reverent, unsure. "Then we are even?" He looked at her, at the firelight flickering across her face, at the fierce girl who fought like the river itself, relentless, wild, refusing to let anything drown her. "No," he said quietly. "Because I owe you more than survival." Her eyes lifted slowly to his. "Then what?" The cedar branches swayed above them, whispering in the cold wind as he answered, "I owe you a promise." She froze, not with fear, but with something deeper, something that trembled inside her like an old wound waking. He lifted a shaking hand, placed it over hers, and whispered, "I will defend your people, as if they were my own." She inhaled sharply, the sound part prayer, part disbelief. Under the cedar tree where she had saved his life twice, once from water, once from death, he gave her the vow that would change both of their fates. A promise spoken not to repay a debt, but to honor the girl who had never let him sink. Dawn crept slowly across the ridge, seeping into the clearing with soft gold light that made the blood in the snow look rust brown instead of red. And as the surviving riders fled into the thinning forest shadows, the Apache camp stood in a trembling quiet. Warriors breathing hard, children peeking from behind hides, women soothing horses still skittish from the night's chaos. The stranger sat slumped beneath the cedar tree where he had made his vow, bruised, pale, barely upright, but alive by the strength of the girl standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder like she wasn't ready to let the world take him from her yet. Around them, the tribe gathered in a slow, solemn circle. Not hostile now, not suspicious, but watchful. The elder stepping forward with the weight of decades in his stride as he studied the stranger from head to toe, his eyes narrowing not in judgment but in assessment. The pacing warrior, still breathing hard, still gripping his bow, stood at the elder's side, jaw tight, expression unreadable, though the anger that once aimed at the stranger now flickered with something closer to reluctant respect. The elder finally spoke. "One of you does not belong," he said, voice low enough that the words felt carved from stone. "And yet, you stood with us when men twice our number came to harm our homes." The stranger swallowed, forcing himself upright despite the pain lancing through his ribs. "They weren't coming for your land," he rasped. "They were coming for anyone they could break. If I ran, they'd only come back stronger." The elder's gaze shifted to the girl, her posture straight despite exhaustion, her eyes fierce with conviction. "You brought him from the river," the elder said. "You risked your life. You risked ours." She nodded once, without apology. "He did not bring danger," she said. "He warned us of it. He helped stop it." A murmur moved through the tribe, soft, surprised, like wind moving through tall grass. The warrior who once opposed him stepped forward, fists clenched at his sides. "I said he would betray us," he admitted. "But last night, he stood first." His voice cracked, barely, but enough for the truth to settle heavily over the camp. The elder turned back to the stranger. "You gave a promise under the cedar tree." The stranger met his gaze steadily. "I meant it." "Promises are easy," the elder replied. "Living them is not." The girl moved closer. So close her shoulder brushed his. So close her presence felt like a shield of her own. "He will keep it," she said, not as a plea, but as a declaration carved from the marrow of her bones. "Because he knows what it costs when no one keeps theirs." Silence deepened, long, taut, breathless, until the elder finally stepped forward, extending his hand not in welcome, but in acknowledgement. "Then you stand with us," he said. The stranger blinked, shock rippling through him. "I do?" "You defended our children," the elder said. "You fought where you could have run. You honored a life debt not with words but with your body." He placed his hand on the stranger's shoulder, a gesture of acceptance older than treaties, older than borders, older than war. "From this day, you walk these lands as a friend of the Apache." The girl exhaled a trembling breath, her eyes shining in a way she quickly looked down to hide. The stranger swallowed hard, overwhelmed, humbled, steadying himself on the cedar trunk as the tribe parted to make room for him. Not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. As the morning sun warmed the clearing and the last chill of night slipped away, she finally looked at him again. Really looked. And he realized the truth behind her bravery, her defiance, her vow. She hadn't saved him because she believed he was strong. She saved him because she hoped, somewhere deep in the part of her that once needed rescuing, that he would choose to be. And now, he had.